Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Halliday, and I am the Dean of the Columbia Climate School and the Director of the Earth Institute. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's exciting Climate Week New York City event, the role of universities in solving our climate crisis. This event is hosted by Columbia, Yale, and Tsinghua University on behalf of the Global Alliance for Universities on Climate, or GALC, of which all three universities are member institutions. GALC was formed in January 2019 and comprises 15 leading universities around the world. Its mission is to advance climate change solutions through research, education, and public outreach. The Alliance does this by promoting exchange and cooperation among member universities and by providing leadership of global higher education efforts addressing climate change. Today's event brings together students and faculty to discuss the critical role of universities in tackling the global climate crisis. As leaders in education, research, and knowledge creation, universities are in a unique position to leverage their expertise and make significant advances in this fight. To kick off the event, I will say a few words about why this is important, then invite my counterparts from Yale and Tsinghua to give remarks. Human-induced climate change is already producing many weather and climate extremes across the world. Just here in the United States, according to tree ring data, the drought in the western part of our country is the worst it's been for about 1,000 years. We have water shortages and repeated wildfires. In the south and eastern United States, there is repeated extreme rainfall. Just a few weeks ago, New York City's Central Park saw the tail end of Hurricane Ida deposit 80 millimeters of rain in just 1 hour. It broke all records, but the previous record had been set only 10 days earlier by Hurricane Henry. And we know climate change will be worse in future, and it'll be far worse in places like the tropics than it will in New York City. And the longer we take to deal with it, the harder it will be. We are running out of time, and the governments of the world need to work much faster to address this issue. We need resilient food systems and water supplies as well as infrastructure. We need governance and support for large-scale human migration. But meanwhile, we must move with urgency to decarbonize society, get ourselves off fossil fuels, and we urgently need technologies that will remove atmospheric carbon from the atmosphere. We also need changes in land use. We need low-carbon manufacturing and transportation. But in addition to science and engineering, we also need policy, economics, finance, law, social sciences, public health, and more. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we need to come up with solutions that are socially just. Universities are crucial to solving the problems posed by changing climate. Universities are trusted to provide deep, creative, and independent thinking across a range of subjects. Universities have a responsibility to accelerate critical research and novel technologies and educate future generations of students to be climate leaders. And for this reason, at Columbia, we are building a climate school to address this urgent problem. The school will be a not widely networked hub for research, learning, and action. It will build upon Columbia's unparalleled strengths in climate science, but it will also develop innovative education, support groundbreaking research, and foster essential solutions from the community to the planetary scale. So that all sounds great, but this problem cannot be solved by one institution. It is perverse and foolish to go down the traditional path of competing between institutions when addressing such a global crisis as climate that's going to destroy people's lives and potentially entire countries. Instead, we need to share our collective academic strengths and work in partnership. We will learn so much more and improve our own scholarship in the process. But more importantly, we stand the best chance of tackling the climate crisis if we work together and in partnership with government, community, business, and civil society. So GALC, the Global Alliance of Universities on Climate, presents a great opportunity to share and work together, and I hope we have a really fruitful discussion today. And with that, I'd now like to invite my esteemed colleague, Dan Esty, to say a few words. Dan is the Hillhouse Professor of Environmental Law and Policy and the director of the Yale Center for Environmental Law and Policy. Dan, over to you.
Alex, thank you so very much. And thanks to your entire team at Columbia that helped organize our event today. It's a great privilege to be with you. And thanks as well to the Global Alliance that's also part of our program today, and Tsinghua there as the leading university in organizing us. We're gathered, as Alex has just told you all, at a watershed moment, a critical moment for our planet's response to climate change. And today, this week, is of course a particularly critical time with the UN General Assembly meeting to discuss not just the pandemic, but climate change, with the Secretary General having declared that this is a critical moment for action, and he will be working to rally countries and leaders across the course of this week. And we come just 6 weeks after the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has given us its latest assessment report, its 6th assessment report, making ever more clear the urgency of the need for a global response that matches the challenge in front of us. And of course, 6 weeks from now, the world leaders will gather, negotiators for climate change for across the world will be in Glasgow in the United Kingdom to try to put new momentum behind this global effort. So it really is a moment of truth for the Paris Agreement of 2015 and our push to do one of the most important things that agreement highlighted in 2015, and that was the need for a new approach that really mobilized all sectors of society. We concluded that the old idea from the 20th century of top-down national governments leading the charge was not going to be enough. We needed to move to a broader set of engagements. So that means subnational governments, it means the business world, but it also means universities, which is the focus of our program today. And I think it's quite interesting to see what universities are already doing. I've been part of a group that produced over the last year something called America's Zero Carbon Action Plan, with almost 100 researchers and academics from a dozen universities across the United States contributing, led by Columbia's own Jeff Sachs and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And that analysis has come together in a way that highlights what we need to do, how we need to do it, focused on 6 critical sectors: power generation, transportation, buildings, land use, and particularly sustainable agriculture, industry, and materials, including the need to really move beyond plastics in many circumstances. And all of this analysis has helped to highlight the pathways that are going to be required to really do deep decarbonization, transformative change of the energy underpinnings of our society. And it's highlighted again some important opportunities for universities, really to bring about some of the innovation required. Because this analysis of the ZCAP group, as we call it, the Zero Carbon Action Plan, as well as 4 or 5 other big analyses of what it's going to take to actually implement the move to an energy transition that can get us to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. All of those efforts make clear that we've got about 80% of the picture in mind, but we're still going to need some significant innovation. And I think that's where universities play a vital role. Innovation in terms of technology developments. And Yale has just launched a new carbon capture center that is going to really work on that scientific breakthrough set of issues, including nature-based solutions. How do we capture more carbon with green plants, with forests, but also the sort of engineering version of carbon capture. And that's one example of the innovation required. But we need, as Alex has just told you, innovation in policy as well. We need to ensure that we're creating new ways to change behavior, new incentives to bring people into the search for climate change solutions. And I've been part of a team at Yale that just produced a book called A Better Planet, 40 Big Ideas for a Sustainable Future, that demonstrates the kinds of ways that universities can contribute to our policy debates. And we also need innovation in finance, in investment, where the money is going to come from to make this transformative change possible. Innovation as well in partnerships. So we've got a broad set of innovation opportunities. Universities are well positioned to help make that change happen. And my colleague from Yale, Casey Pickett, will talk about another part of Yale's leading edge effort, our internal climate policy structure that involves a carbon charge, an internal carbon charge to sharpen the incentive for energy efficiency and a shift away from fossil fuel dependence. So with all of that, I thank you for joining this conversation today. The role of universities will be essential, particularly to the extent we know that innovation is absolutely fundamental to our success as a country, as a society, and as a global community in the response to climate change. So with that, please allow me to bring Dr. Zheng Li to the virtual microphone. He is the Secretary General of our Global Alliance of Universities on Climate. He is also the Executive Vice President of the Institute for Climate Change and Sustainable Development at Tsinghua University. Dr. Zheng Li, the virtual microphone is yours.
Thank you, Dan, for the invitation. So we don't get to meet in person, but it is a pleasure to speak to everyone from Beijing during this important occasion. Climate Week, New York City has developed into the major stage for grassroots stakeholders to take joint actions for global climate governance. A few weeks ago, the Secretariat of the Global Alliance of Universities on Climate, GAUC, got the good news from Columbia on its climate school becoming an official university partner of the Climate Week, New York City. So after, Tsinghua and Yale were invited to join forces as the organizer of today's event. Thus, I would like to thank Columbia and Yale here for their kind invitation. Taking initiatives like this sets the exemplar of cross-university cooperation. Around the world, everyone is waking up from the impact of pandemic to an even greater challenge, climate change. The climate crisis requires multidisciplinary global effort, and we've seen the leadership from states, including China, Korea, and the European Union. We've also seen non-state actors actively contributing to the efforts. The Global Alliance of Universities on Climate, which now have 15 world-leading universities as members from all 6 habitable continents around the world, is an example of non-state actors vowing to contributing to the common crisis facing humanity. Universities play multiple critical roles in society, from educating the future to finding solutions to the most pressing issues in the world. In China, Tsinghua is actively contributing and leading the fight in tackling climate change. Last year, my institute, the Institute for Climate Change and Sustainable Development, published the research around China's long-term low-carbon development strategy and the transition pathways, gathering the most pioneer research findings from 24 institutions, covering important and hard-to-abate sectors in China. And this research was helpful in identifying the carbon neutrality pledge of 2060. On the technological breakthroughs front, tomorrow, we will see the launch of the Institute for Carbon Neutrality in Tsinghua, which aims at utilizing the technological research from the various subjects in Tsinghua University on the important hard-to-tackle issues of climate change, such as carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and all kinds of alternative energy sources. This institute is the product of the time we are in, as many countries have announced their decarbonization plans and carbon neutrality pledges, and also inspired from pioneering leaders like Columbia. And I think that's the beauty of our alliance. It acts as an accelerator, pressing everyone to take decisive action, because the efforts of every member in the alliance, we've also received recognition from important world leaders like Antonio Guterres. His address at the Climate Change Global Lectures was the first address to youth since the pandemic. This has spurred out to be a huge motivation boost for everyone in taking a green recovery from COVID. Finally, I hope my speech has also brought some ideas to you to inspire you in incorporate climate change in your daily decision making. because together we can. Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Dan Zarilli to begin the faculty panel session. So Dan is the Special Advisor, Climate and Sustainable Development, Columbia University. So Dan, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, and thank you to both Dan Esty from Yale and Alex Halliday from Columbia for those inspiring remarks. Again, my name is Dan Zarilli. I'm the special advisor here at Columbia University for climate and sustainability, and I'm moderating this next panel discussion among faculty. And we're thrilled to be coming to you live from New York City, from New Haven, Connecticut, as well as Beijing, on this core question of what is the role of a university in solving this climate crisis. I joined Columbia just a few months ago, and so this question is very timely for me, and understanding, what we're doing here at Columbia and the creation of the Columbia Climate School, how we're doing this in partnership with other universities like Yale and Tsinghua. And I've come to this conversation quite a bit from the city side, where I used to serve as the Chief Climate Policy Advisor in the New York City Mayor's office. And I was constantly getting questions around what was the role of cities in this. And Dan Esty in his remarks made the key point around how it wasn't enough for just nations to be solving this crisis. It became a subnational problem as well, and subnational solutions were coming to the fore. That meant cities, and of course that means universities. And we're all grappling with this key challenge as we think about what it is that we do well as a university, whether it's creating knowledge and research, education, the elements of service and achieving impact, the work we do to influence policymakers and practitioners, but also thinking about what we do on our own campus and the facilities we operate and how we can walk the walk as we're, with our own assets. But it's also key, and I think Alex made this point very directly, that it's not enough just to think about our own campuses, our own universities. It's why we are doing this event co-hosted with the Global Alliance for Universities on Climate, because this is a problem that needs collaboration to solve it. And so what we're doing here with the creation of the Columbia Climate School, of course, is something that many universities are all grappling with. And so I am thrilled to be able to moderate this panel of experts and faculty this morning, this afternoon and evening, depending where you are. And I'd like to bring our panelists into the conversation now. And let me first introduce Dr. Lisa Dale, a lecturer in discipline undergraduate program in sustainable development here at Columbia University. We're also joined by Casey Pickett, director of the Yale Carbon Charge at Yale University, and Dr. Bin Wang, Executive Secretary General of the Global Alliance of Universities on Climate at Tsinghua University. I'd like to ask each of them to introduce themselves a little further and offer some first remarks on their perspective as faculty at leading universities on what the role of universities are in solving this climate crisis. This is the first panel conversation. We'll also have a second panel conversation later on to hear from students that will be moderated by Jessica Prada, my colleague here at Columbia University. And for both of these panels, we're going to have some moderated conversation and then some opportunity for Q&A by the audience. So if you have any questions, please get them into the Q&A, and we'll be looking at those and pulling those forward to ask the panelists as we're having this conversation. So let me first turn to Dr. Lisa Dale. Lisa, can you please introduce yourself and offer some early thoughts on this question? What is the role of university in solving this climate crisis?
Terrific. Thanks so much, Dan. And thanks to everybody for those great opening remarks on, I think, a really critical and fascinating issue. I'm Lisa Dale. I teach here at Columbia University in the undergraduate program on sustainable development. I'm a political scientist by training, so my classes are firmly in the social sciences, and we study environmental policy and social science research methods and challenges associated with sustainable development. So I think my preliminary thoughts to this important question, the role of universities, I'm going to focus a couple of quick comments on the role that we have in working with undergraduate students. I think certainly universities have a research and innovation role. They have an international reach. They have a funding opportunity, all sorts of things that I think you'll hear about in the course of this conversation. But my role working specifically with undergraduate students, I want to make sure I amplify that role of the university. And, I see undergraduate students who arrive at Columbia starry-eyed and idealistic and energetic, but also with a understandably simplified version of the problem and their place in it. And I often encounter undergrads who have these very sort of black and white ideas about who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, and what we need to do to solve this. And so I think part of the role of universities is to foster leadership by exposing these students to the complexities and the nuances of these problems. Climate change is quite complex, and eliminating fossil fuels, for example, may sound like a great idea to a first-year undergraduate, but they have to understand better some of the trade-offs that I think are inherent in those decisions, and understand, not to criticize, but to truly understand why this problem has persisted for so long, and we've been unable as a globe to solve it quickly and easily. Part of the way we do that with undergraduates is through teaching. We invite them into our classes where we sort of teach them the content around climate change and activism. But part of it also is by providing them with opportunities on campus to participate in these sort of mini laboratories of action, where they get to see firsthand, for example, why it's hard to persuade some of their fellow students to take actions that they think are essential and maybe obvious. And having some of those early opportunities on a college campus where the consequences are relatively muted, where they have a chance to spread their wings for the first time and stand on their own, helps build capacity and energy for them in the future. I think there are so many exciting examples now of the youth climate movement that many of my students are really inspired and eager to get involved. And part of the role of a university, I think, is to help channel that energy, facilitate its growth, and make it more sophisticated, so that we are graduating students into the world who have a range of skills and abilities to be part of the solution. So I think I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer more questions when we get there.
Wonderful, thank you, Lisa. A lot of interesting things I'd love to follow up with as this conversation goes on. Let me turn to you, Casey, for some brief introductory remarks.
Thanks very much, Dan. So I have the pleasure of working in the Provost's office at Yale, and have been here for the last 5 years, running a program that Dan Esty helped to envision and create, the Yale Carbon Charge, which is an internal carbon tax system at Yale. The Provost's office charges our different organizational units, including our schools, for the carbon emissions that result from their buildings. And we've conducted this as an on-campus experiment to understand better how internal carbon pricing works in a context like this. It has generated some interest. We have been able to share what we're doing fairly broadly. A number of other institutions and some companies have been interested. That's been rewarding to see how a strategic kind of project at a university like this can make some impact. We have the ability as a university, I've gotten to see this firsthand, we have the ability to share what we're doing in a different way than some other kinds of societal actors can. Early in the project, we were doing a webinar series with the World Economic Forum and the World Bank on internal carbon pricing, interviewing different companies about their internal carbon price systems. And we found that we sort of got to the bottom of what people were willing to share about the intricacies and challenges of the ways that their internal systems worked pretty quickly. And we don't have those same constraints in a research university environment. We're able to be quite open about what's working and what's not working. And that has been valuable, I think, for people to see. So that's just an example of the kind of thing that you can do. We've been able to get students involved. Students have been really excited to be involved and have absolutely developed the kinds of lessons that Lisa was talking about. How do you convince your fellow students to change their behavior? How do you work to influence administrators in a complicated organization like this? That's been valuable to see. So those are some of the roles and some examples of the roles that universities can play.
Thanks, Casey. That's fascinating. I definitely want to follow up on that a little bit further on. And before turning it over to Binbin, I'd just like to make a reminder to the audience, if there are questions that you're going to want to ask, please get them into the Q&A so that we can pull those forward as part of the conversation. Dr. Wang, I'd like to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and to give your thoughts on the role of universities in solving this climate crisis.
Thank you, Dan. I'm Binbin, and I'm pleasure to work for GAUC as the Executive Secretary General. And I'm very lucky because we have a very wonderful team members in the Secretariat, thus we can reach out to different member universities. In total, we have 15 member universities around the world. So we work together to see how we can contribute our collective efforts to the global climate governance. So meanwhile, I'm the social scientist on climate. I have tracked the global climate governance since 2009. That COP is Copenhagen. So I think most of us have remembered that COP, and what we witnessed there is why we are here, why we work for a successful COP26. It's so important for all of us, for the human, to face to the challenge and find the common solutions. And my research interest is public awareness, public perception, and multi-stakeholder cooperation. So I have worked together with Yale program on climate change communication for around more than 10 years to conduct the national and the cross-national public awareness survey to test what's the public's reaction to the climate policy, and also, to the what the public would like to do, what they can contribute to the global actions. So it's a very interesting topic, and I hope I can have more time to introduce this research, but I think this time I'd better, stop here. And about the role of the universities, here I conclude 3 points. I totally agree with the former two panelists' opinions, and besides them, I think I have three additional points. So the first one is, I think the universities, we have leading role on science, because we have different kind of majors, and we should contribute the science-based research to different multi-stakeholders to boost them to move on. And the second role is we need to act as objective supporters for policymakers. Here I highlight objective because this kind of as a supporter, we need to provide, as I mentioned, science-based evidence to policymakers to identify the key solutions, the key directions to push the global cooperation ahead. And the last one is university should be an accelerator for the bottom-up multi-stakeholder cooperation. Although we are universities, we cannot only stay inside the campus. We should reach out to work with different multi-stakeholders. Thus, we can get the collective success. Yes, that's my points.
That's wonderful. And I really appreciate you bringing those points up, because I think that's certainly from my own background as a former policymaker, I'm very interested in this question around, the role of universities in supporting policymakers, practitioners, and how do we bring all of the research and all of the smarts that are across the universities out into the world in new and different ways. And so I'd be interested to hear from each of our panelists a little bit of their thoughts on that role of impact, whether it's with, I think, Lisa, you had some really interesting points around the next generation of climate leaders and teaching them the complexities of the world, which I think is a different version of impact. Or Casey, your prior work as a public official in Connecticut, and I'd be really interested to hear that from Binbin of what this looks like in China as well. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that essential focus on bringing the education and science and research out into the world through impact. Bimba, let me start with you since you brought that piece up and wanted to go a little further. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that has been achieved and the challenges you've had with that as well.
Yes, I think it's a very good question. So when we talk about impacts, especially as this moment, I think no one can just rely on themselves to take actions, or we can achieve the goal, as we mentioned, the net zero goal. So everyone should work together, not only the policymaker, but also the general public, the academia. We should come together. I think the good point is that the positive point is that even in China, more and more multi-stakeholders, we come together, and especially in the climate field, and we work together with the civil society and very closely to see how to support each other. And here I would like to highlight we have a very important leader, Minister Xie Zhenghua, and he is very respected, and we worked with him very closely, and I witnessed what happened. The biggest difference, compare with before COP15, before 2009. At that moment, different stakeholders just stay at their own area, their own comfortable zone. But now, not only because of we have a good leader, but also because of we have the confidence, and we have the shared awareness that we should work together within China and also with the international community. And I think this is also the point. I feel very lucky because I worked with GOC, and in this we call it as GOC family, because it's not only Tsinghua's issue, it's all our 15 member universities issue. So we work together, especially this year, since we really want to get a successful COP26. So here I would like to mention a summit. We are now work together. It's a Climate Act Summit. So we call it as a Global Youth Summit on Net Zero Future. Actually, it's our GOC's third graduate forum. But since this year, it's a starting year of global carbon neutrality, and also the youth's important role to reach the net zero future. So thus we upgrade the graduate forum to a really, global youth summit and open this summit to the global youth. And we hope to, amplify the impacts of GOC to promote the global youth awareness and voices and actions to contribute to the global actions. So for this summit, we have two very interesting points. The first one is our theme is climate acts. Here you can see we have different measures, and climate change is not only the 13 SDGs. SDG have 17 goals. So as we observed, climate change has strong relationship with others. If we just stay in our silos, we cannot reach the SDGs. So we should work together. Well, climate change has some synergy with different SDGs like biodiversity, nature, energy. So this time, different universities like Columbia, you host the Climate Acts Energy Forum, and Yale, you host the Climate Acts Health because of COVID-19, and Oxford hosts the Climate Acts Nature and Biodiversity, and Tsinghua hosts the Climate Acts Transportation and all other SDGs. So in this kind of theme, we hope we can inspire more youth to think about what are their measures related to climate change. Not only, think about climate change from one direction, we can really, amplify from different directions to see how to address climate change together. And another interesting point is that although this summit, we call on 6 universities to work together, led by Cambridge and Imperial as the leading organizers for this summit, when other member universities, they notice that there is a summit, we should work together. They contribute their own event to the summit. So besides the 6 universities, now we have other 6 universities from Brazil, from Japan, from South Africa. They all would like to contribute their own event. So as I introduced in a meeting with President Sama, it's a kind of a university determined contribution, as same as national determined contribution. It's a kind of a UDC. So this is what I want to say. It's a kind of impacts. It's a kind of impacts we want to show to the world. When we work together, when we come together, we can do more than our own. So I think this also an invitation for on behalf of GOG to welcome all the the youth around the world to join this summit. And my colleague will share the linkage of the summit in the chat zone, and you can find it and join us, please. And the last point is that today is a very important special day for Chinese, because in the traditional Chinese culture, today is a mid-moon day. So it means all the family members, we stay together and enjoy the round moon and the round moon cake on the table. So also, this event is a starting warm-up event for the summit. I think it's a very positive signal, and I hope with our GOG family, this time together, we can get a very fruitful summit for a very successful COP26. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Binbin. And I really appreciate you bringing up the graduate forum. And I wonder if our events team maybe can put a link in the chat for those that might be interested to be able to look up further about that. Lisa, let me turn to you. I'd like to pose this a similar question to you around, what has been your focus on impact? And you mentioned some of it with undergraduates, of course. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how do you think universities can achieve greater impact in this crisis?
Great, thanks, Dan. I think there's a lot of ways to sort of activate the student body. So I'll continue to talk about students and the role of students in this, although I'm certainly aware that, university faculty, staff, and administration have a key role to play in the role of a university. But I think my area of where I work and spend the most time is around students, mostly undergrads, but also graduate students. So I'll just talk about their role and how we can sort of amplify their impact. So, one way that I think universities offer these unique bubbles of experimentation for innovation is through university developed sustainability plans or net zero type plans. And Columbia University just went through this process, again, updated our sustainability plan. Now it's the 2030 document. And I had the opportunity to serve on the transportation committee as part of the development of that plan. And in that committee, we had students also sort of tasked with sitting in, helping, contributing, and playing a part in the development of the new Columbia plan. And I think a few really important things come out of that are a little bit less obvious than the final product, the report, which of course is a triumph. And I think we all felt quite good about where that plan landed. But the process of getting there, I think, is just as important as that product. So the process gave us, in my experience, totally unique opportunity to sit around a table with administrators from all different corners of Columbia University to think about the transportation issue deeply. That was the committee I was working on. So we had, for example, the athletics department sitting at the table because they use Columbia buses and vans to transport athletic teams. It was a dimension of the transportation challenge I had never thought of, right? And I don't have much opportunity in my daily life to interact with the athletics department at Columbia. But to sit there and have the athletics department sitting there with the finance team, with purchasing and procurement, alongside some of the more expected administrators who are working on this kind of sustainability plan, gives students sitting at that table a real taste of these complexities. And I think it also forges relationships and connections that, in a parallel universe where we didn't all have to work from home over the next 18 months, I imagine would have been really fruitful, sort of walking around campus and having these new connections to previously distant departments and administrative units. And we talk a lot in academia about breaking down silos. It's very difficult to do in practice for all sorts of reasons. But projects like this one that are concrete, like building a sustainability plan for the university, can be a vehicle for breaking down those barriers, breaking down those silos, giving people who work in very different corners of the university an opportunity to sit together at a table with a shared goal. And so I learned a lot about how the athletic department transports athletic teams and maybe where the opportunities are for them to reduce miles or use electric vehicles, or, you know, the nuances of actually making it happen. But the experience of that conversation across silos was incredibly valuable for me, and I think for the students who were part of that effort. So that's an example. I think those students are then equipped when they go forth to tackle a real life challenge outside of the university. They may more automatically think about, well, we need to reach across these barriers. We need to get out of our silo. What about bringing these other people into the conversation? And those are really good instincts for leadership that we can foster through demonstrating how it's done.
That's great, Lisa. And for anyone out there who wants to learn more about Columbia's sustainability plan, Plan 2030, one, Jessica Prada, who led that exercise, is the moderator of our next panel. And also we're having a whole event on that on Thursday morning. And so please look for that on Columbia's Climate Week website. Casey, let me turn to you, because I'd like to ask this question, and particularly with your the work you've been doing on internal carbon charging. It is certainly a version of impact, and also your perspective is really unique as a former public official in Connecticut. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what impact really means, and what are we getting right and what are we not getting right as universities?
Sure. Thanks very much, Dan. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we're doing. I was part of Yale has, like many institutions, has a pretty robust exchange with local and federal government. Dan Esty and I served at the same time in quite different roles at the Connecticut state government, and then have both come back to Yale where we were before. And so that kind of exchange and flow through the system, is a great way to build relationships and bring exchange ideas between places, right? I find this question really important and difficult. There are thousands of faculty and staff at universities around the world who have been working hard on climate change for decades, and they've been doing really good work, and we haven't solved the problem yet. And so is the issue that we need to be working more and harder and faster and better, and or do we need to be doing things differently? I think that's a question really worth pondering. At Yale, we're working on a new effort for us called the Planetary Solutions Project, which is aimed squarely at the kinds of things that Lisa is calling out as challenges. The challenge of climate change is technically a super wicked problem, right? It is far too complex to be solved within any single discipline. And so the only way we're going to develop solutions that match the scale and complexity of the problems at hand are by finding people who have, the other half of a half brilliant idea, and connecting between natural sciences and physical sciences and social sciences and humanities and arts and communications. You know, there are so many different parts of these problems. You know, at Yale, we've got like many institutions on this call and elsewhere, faculty doing incredible work. We've got faculty who are developing economic tools to reverse climate change and using evolution science to stop biodiversity loss, and focusing on improving human health, focusing on, you know, converting sunlight into fuel, or developing natural ways of capturing carbon, promoting environmental justice, building public awareness around climate change. How can we more effectively within the institution and between the institution and other institutions and governments and private sector organizations develop collaborations that really move the needle on these challenges? That's one of the things we're going to be working hard on in this Planetary Solutions project at Yale.
Wonderful. Thank you, Casey, for that. I'm seeing some questions start to come in on the Q&A. If anyone has any, now's a great time to bring them in. I see there's two different questions here that sort of are on the same theme, and I'd love to get Lisa's thoughts on this. Two different questions around, you know, as a student or perhaps even as faculty and staff at different universities that are seem to be challenged with getting their either administration focused on funding and delivering real climate solutions on their campus. Lisa, I'm curious your thoughts on this, and you opened up with talking about students that come in wild-eyed and idealistic about the solutions and the need to understand the complexities. How do you channel that energy, and what guidance would you have for students that are coming onto campus that want to see their university doing more?
I always encourage students to get involved before they begin to protest and object. And so I think some students come in with their first instinct being, well, this isn't good, or I object to this, or I want to push for this, and I'm going to be an activist. But they haven't yet taken the time to meet the key players, understand the challenges they're up against, and really get their arms around what the trade-offs are. So they're not offering realistic, viable solutions. They're creating friction. That friction can be valuable. I think it can spur action. But I always encourage them to take a step back before they start arguing and first try to learn. So I encourage them to sign up for committees, attend events, sit in on meetings, get to know your professors, really take the time to get the lay of the land. I worked in politics as well, just like Casey, and I know some other people here on this panel in Colorado. I worked in policy analysis for the state of Colorado. And we always were amazed by the people who would show up to legislative hearings, not knowing anybody and just trying to lobby for their issue. They were much less effective than the people who were there day in, day out and took the time to get to know committee members, understand the issues that were at hand, and could really speak knowledgeably in a contextual setting about what we're up against and offer realistic solutions. Those people are much more effective at lobbying. And I think the same lesson holds on campus. Students who take the time to get to know professors, establish themselves as being productive, open-minded, open ears players in this conversation are much more likely to get some traction and make things happen.
It's a really interesting point. The comparison of students to lobbyists in this is makes me chuckle. This is but it's a really important point of, get to know the issues, get to know the players, and you will have greater impact that way. And getting involved in committees or the Sustainable Leaders Network here on Columbia's campus, there's a lot of different channels for doing that. And of course, the next panel is going to offer the student perspective on some of these questions as well. So stick around for that. There is another set of questions in here about making sure, there's a few questions about Indigenous rights and how universities can center equity and justice in our work in solving the climate crisis. I'm not sure who to pose that to, but I'd like to perhaps hear either Binbin or Casey's point of view on that question and how that comes up on your universities, these questions around environmental justice, climate justice, and what we can be doing as a university to promote that.
Binbin?
Casey, why don't you, maybe I'll pick somebody.
Sure, thanks. Again, really good question. I think, that work starts with introspection and looking really hard, each of us ourselves, at the ways that we participate in white supremacy culture. Not all of us on the call, of course, but and for academic institutions, that's we need to be doing the same thing, right? And it's uncomfortable work, and if it's not uncomfortable, then probably not doing it right. And be looking for the way, let's see, it requires a level of both patience and impatience at the same time, right? It takes far too long. It's far too long in coming. Our work on justice, our real meaningful work on justice, and yet we have to push really hard. I'm not sure.
It strikes me that this is, climate change is in both ways a technological problem as well as a political and social problem, and figuring out solutions that only solve one dimension there don't quite cut it. And Binbin, I would love to hear your perspective on this, and how this issue has been playing out on Tsinghua University.
Yes, I really love this question because climate justice is so important. Most of the time when we highlight, energy transition, and it's the rich people or rich country who highlight this kind of questions, and where is the vulnerable voice? We cannot hear that. And I can give you a very interesting personal story here. I worked with Oxfam, an international developmental organization, for around 8 years. So in that 8 years, I worked as the China climate lead on climate change and poverty. So from that experience, it gave me a perspective to highlight, justice, especially to respect the right and power from the right of the poor people from the rural area, because most of the time their voices cannot be heard, but they contribute to the greenhouse, they didn't contribute to the greenhouse, I can see, but they were impacted by the climate crisis, so mostly. So it's unfair. And what can we do? Especially when we talk about energy transition, most of the time, this kind of poor people, they work for the dirty energy. So how can we care about them? And with this kind of experience, I was recruited by Tsinghua University. I think it's a kind of a mirror to say Tsinghua is very inclusive and to different. It's a one point of the Tsinghua's culture, I think, to attract different faculty from with different kind of background, and thus can amplify like this kind of question, climate justice, to the daily research, not only for some unique professors, but for all the academic atmosphere. We highlight this kind of justice perspective, and especially I think it's very important for the student to have this kind of awareness. And otherwise we can, if we talk about climate change, it's not related to justice, then it's so pity, because on this world there are more than half people, they still stay in the vulnerable situation. So I think this is also why GAUK included not only some universities who are good at technology. We also invite some universities like LSE and other member universities who are very good at social scientists. They join GAUK, and thus GAUK can also contribute a justice solution to the global climate governance.
Thank you so much, Binbin. And time sure flies on these conversations, and I think we've just about run out of time here. I would love to thank the panelists on this conversation, Casey Pickett, Binbin Wang, and Lisa Dale, for their contributions to this conversation. And I hope everyone has enjoyed this as much as I have. And with that, let me wrap this up. And now it's time to start the next panel conversation, and I'll turn it over to Jessica Prada, who is moderating the student conversation. So thank you very much, everyone, and over to you, Jess.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And thanks everyone who's joining us from around the world for this terrific event. My name is Jess Prada. I have the privilege of moderating this next panel entitled Student Perspective University Climate Action. As you heard earlier, just a brief intro on myself. At Columbia, I oversee the campus sustainability efforts as the AVP of Environmental Stewardship. And our office did recently curate the development of Columbia's 10-year sustainability plan, which was launched in April of 2021. And the plan sets a series of really aggressive science-based targets that put Columbia on a path to net zero by 2050. As Lisa mentioned earlier, to develop that plan, we did set up working groups that helped to centralize the conversation on the many key topics. Transportation was the one that Lisa sat on. We also addressed, obviously, energy waste, procurement, et cetera. And we brought together all the key stakeholders at a university, so faculty, administrators, and most relevant to this panel, students. I know this is an approach that many universities take to approach an undertaking like this, because it is on so many levels. It offers so many connections that are really long lasting and that I think help catapult students forward even after they graduate. And so as work gets underway to advance towards our goals, and its particular relevance to this, is the role of the student, and critical to addressing climate change. To continue engaging students in and out of the classroom is to provide these mini laboratories of action. So we do have the privilege today of engaging with 3 students, and we have, and I'm not seeing their videos yet. Here we go. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to give everyone the opportunity to briefly introduce themselves. And we have a really good conversation lined up for everyone to hear more about the important work underway at each of these universities and the role that these students see in addressing climate on their campus and beyond. So one of the first questions that I'd like to hear from you all on is just, why you chose the program that you are in now. And if you can maybe start before you answer that question by introducing yourself and telling us where you're from, that would be terrific. So why don't we start with you, Arti? Just tell us again your name, your program, your school, and why you chose to attend.
Hi, I'm Arti Aurora. I'm at the Columbia Climate School and I'm in the Climate and Society Master's program. I decided to come to Columbia because I'm interested in working in agriculture and food, and I was really compelled by the work being done at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society and the work that they do. And so that's why I chose to come here. And I'm also interested in the work that, climate work is related to both the social and the environmental, and that's a big focus of this particular program.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Alyssa, do you want to go next? Just tell us your name, your program, and why you chose your school.
Sure, and thank you so much for moderating and having us here today. My name is Alyssa. I'm a joint degree student at Yale Law School and Yale School of the Environment. So I'm pursuing a JD as well as a master's in environmental science. And I decided to pursue this program because I wanted to be a part of the efforts to shape environmental climate law and policy. So before grad school, I studied some economics and worked in environmental consulting, I think answering a lot of the what questions. What are the impacts of climate change on the electricity grid, on wildfire intensity, on flooding in Vietnam? These were some of the questions I was looking at then. And I wanted to go to graduate school to work more on the how questions. How do we act to prevent climate change and promote environmental justice? How do we support frontline communities in their efforts to lead a just transition? And in grad school, I focused on litigation in the United States and abroad, federal and state legislation, and local ordinances to support climate and environmental justice.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. Sheng-Chen, why don't we turn to you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you chose your program.
Yeah, so I am Zhang Shangchen, a member of Gaoke Youth Delegation from Tsinghua University, and I'm studying in Global Environment Program, which is an undergraduate program. I'm in my 4th year of my undergraduate. And when I was a middle school student, I realized the effects of climate change were so close to us, and the climate extremes has a profound impact on the globe, especially on the poor and the vulnerable regions. And I'm eager to find a solution. I believe that to address climate change, I need interdisciplinary knowledge and opportunities to learn from the policymakers. So I chose a global environment program, which makes me can learn a lot about climate change from the policymakers and the professors and so on. And as I learned more and more about climate change, I feel the urge to do something from now on as a young student. And that's why I chose GOG to do something. And as for the future, I'd like to further study about the climate change and its impact on human health. I think it's a very important problem. And I will going to study in Tsinghua University for next several years. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting to hear there's so many different perspectives that the student can take on this issue. I mean, we're looking at, someone studying it from the legal perspective, the societal perspective, the health perspective, and all of these are so critical. And I'm curious, sort of, as you think about that and your involvement on campus, and then also what you feel the role of universities is to address universities in general to address in the climate crisis. What do you think that role looks like? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Alyssa, why don't we start with you on that question, and we can do a round robin.
Sure. I think echoing what other panelists have said earlier in this event, I do think universities play an educational and innovative role. I see universities as tasked with giving young people the tools to tackle the climate crisis, as well as producing cutting edge proposals and research. And I think that's an incredibly important role. And it's exciting to see so many universities developing new climate change centers, projects, and course offerings. I just saw, for example, Stellenbosch University in South Africa just opened a climate center this summer. Columbia, I think there's a number of incredible centers for that educational and innovative role. But I also think that universities should be leading by example, given that they do wield enormous power, finances, resources, and influence. And I think with this power comes a responsibility to have ambitious climate policies of their own. So I think that includes aligning investments and operations with a livable future for this generation, for future generations. So I think that can involve addressing endowment investments, ambitious university decarbonization plans, and something I hope to bring up later as well is a dedication to environmental and climate justice in the communities in which they operate and in partnership with those communities, because all of these universities have a local context and have a city, a state, a country where they're operating, and building those meaningful partnerships as well.
Absolutely. Those are all really great points. Thank you. I agree. I mean, it's so important to sort of look at this issue from all angles and make sure, as we are pursuing the research and doing the work on the academic side, that also the university is walking the talk and how it's operating itself. All really key points. Why don't we turn to you, Sheng-Chen? What are your thoughts on the role of universities in general to address the climate crisis?
Okay, I very agree with various panelists, and I think the role of university is to collaborate and develop students in joint research. And as Dr. Wang mentioned, the climate summit is coming. And I think it's a perfect example to explain that and shows us the role of university in general to addressing climate crisis. In the summit, as academic institutions, universities share resources for academic collaboration and addressing the climate crisis. We all know that it requires the interdisciplinary knowledge and research, and that's where the universities can come in. And each university has its own area of expertise. We know that some are good at environmental engineering and some are good at policymaking, and working together towards a common goal can bring a great synergy. And besides, the summit serves well as a platform for our students to get inspired and learn from each other, not only from the professors on the summit and from the universities, but from the peers from all over the world. It shows us that the cooperation among universities will give the students opportunities to grow up. And as students, we can find that it's time to do something, and it's time to act together. Together, we can do more than we as individuals. So I think it's a good way.
Yeah, definitely. Right. I mean, it's like Lisa mentioned earlier, the involvement in processes and things on campus just only enable students to amplify what they're able to do and the experience they bring once they graduate. Right. Terrific points. Thank you so much. Arthi, would you like to add to the conversation? What are your thoughts on the role of universities in addressing climate crisis?
I definitely agree with both of the other panelists about investments and in collaboration, sort of like the nuts and bolts of how do universities become leaders by leading by example, and what are our goals for decarbonization, or whatever that might be. I think universities also have a role in making a more diverse student body that can institutions can then hire more diversely, and we know that institutions that have diverse groups of people making decisions make better decisions. And universities can foster that by making higher education more accessible to those who are traditionally locked out of higher education. I think that's one of the ways that we can foster equity and justice in this space.
That's really a great perspective. I mean, so we heard leading by example, making sure that there's responsibility sort of is mirrored on both sides of what a university champions. We heard about the importance of collaboration, interdisciplinary research, prioritizing diversity, these, all critical points. And I'm curious, with those thoughts in mind, turning it more specifically to your university, can you speak a little bit about what you would like for your university to be doing in the current climate moment and how they might amplify their efforts to build on what's already underway? So let's see, why don't we start with Sheng-Chen?
Okay, so as for Tsinghua, my own university, I wanted to be more involved in the international cooperation and multilateral process to address climate change, because I think that the universities can not only focus on their own research and development, but should also collaborate extensively around the world. Extensive international cooperation will bring the innovative energy and multidisciplinary cross-research to our own universities. And I think that it will let more people in our universities in different schools to see the value of collaboration, and the innovation and collaboration are precisely what we need to address climate change. That's my opinion.
Excellent. Thanks so much for sharing that. Arthi?
For the climate school, I would like there to be a focus on justice and equity. That's something that's being incorporated into our curriculum, but I would like that to be more of a focus of our curriculum moving forward. I would like the school to focus on the arts and the role the arts play in communicating, climate crisis with the public and even policymakers. There's something vivid about the arts that facts and figures can't necessarily capture. And I would like us to focus on that aspect. And the last would be to focus on grief. Doing climate work oftentimes means moving through grief many times, and there is an emotional side to this work. And I would like there to be space for that for students, for the faculty, but also for the public who access this particular space that the climate school is in and who interact with students and faculty here.
Very interesting. Right. The emotional side of this actually very fascinating to me personally. Right. It sort of enables us to reach beyond our own boundaries and access this issue on a much deeper level. I can appreciate that. Alyssa, would you like to add to this question?
Yeah, and I'm loving seeing everyone's perspectives too and hearing. I
Yeah.
feel like we all have different answers to this question. So it's awesome to hear what everyone, hear out the other panelists. So yeah, I have many thoughts on this question, but I'll keep it brief for now. So yeah, I think tying into what I said about leading by example, I always want to see Yale being as ambitious as possible with their own decarbonization plan. I think they have recently, they bumped up some of the targets, but I think aiming for full decarbonization as fully as possible by 2035, not just carbon neutrality. I think pushing to be as ambitious as we can about the university's commitments, including phasing out investment in fossil fuels, as other universities have done, including I know Columbia recently phasing out that investment. So I think that's the first, just increasing the ambition of Yale University. And I think also, as I mentioned, Yale doing more to address its context in New Haven and keeping promises to the people of New Haven, as well as increasing voluntary contributions to the city tax base. And I think it's really important to talk about how this is a climate issue. This is an environmental justice issue, a racial justice issue, that Yale could be doing more to support climate resilience and environmental justice in this community through contributions to the city, as well as job creation and other promises that Yale has made and has talked about. And I think the final note, which is kind of just something I'm really passionate about, is we have a lot of great environmental and climate centers at Yale, but I would love to see a project on climate environmental legislation. I think we have a lot of centers doing law and policy work, but to have a project focused on training students to write legislation, analyze legislation at all different levels of government, and as well as working with international partners, even supporting city ordinances, both in the US and abroad, supporting new state level legislation in the US. And I'd love to see a project that would train us up on how to support legislators and how to see that legislation pass at every level of government.
Mm-hmm. Great perspective. I mean, one of the benefits I think of, having this panel and having, students on with different faculty members and members of our university is hopefully there's pathways now, even after this event, to further explore some of these specific ideas. So thank you so much for sharing those. Before I move to some of the other last questions, I do want to remind folks in the audience that there is a Q&A open. So if you do have questions that you would like to pose to this panel, please do so. We have only a few minutes left. So we started super 30,000 feet up, and we started to get a little more specific and talking about what we would like to see, what you would like to see our universities doing. The next question is really about the students and your role as students, but more specifically the student body. I'd love to hear thoughts from you on what you feel the role of the student body is in creating a culture of sustainability at your campuses, and perhaps bringing in some of the threads that you mentioned in some of your previous questions. So Arthi, why don't we start with you on this one? What are your thoughts on this topic?
So sort of echoing what Lisa was saying about students really collaborating with faculty and with administration, here at Columbia, the student group that really drives environmental work and on campus and sustainability on campus has been doing so for 15 years in collaboration with dining and with housing and with administration. I think that's really helpful because they have a root in with the administration itself, and that really helps push change. Mm-hmm. I think we have 87 students at the climate school now, and that's like a place where we're already starting to talk in groups and in our chats about ways that we can collaborate with each other, and also like work we can do on campus. And I think that really expanding that out as the year goes on.
Mm-hmm. So sort of connecting internally within each other and then finding ways to connect with established relationships to amplify your desire to do more.
Definitely. And there's lots of other groups on campus that, we can join in with and contribute to and, learn from. So I think having that like open-mindedness to go to like what is already being done is also what we're doing.
Awesome. Great point. Alyssa, thoughts on this?
Yeah, echoing what Arti said, as well as, so I think part of that, I wanted to tie into the prior conversation about students as lobbyists. I think, the role of students in trying to push the institution to have more ambitious climate programs, for example, and really seeing, holding both. I think it's good practice as well, just for going forward in life of like how to support driving institutions forward and changing institutions, and doing that together in your university as its own form of learning, mobilizing with other students and working with faculty and talking to faculty about how to change the institution, I think is really an important role of students. And I also think something that I've been thinking a lot about recently is having conversations in the student body of how to make sure that every industry that we're going to go work in is aligned with a livable future. So that's not just for the folks who are going to go do environmental work, that's for people going into management consulting, finance, law firms, ad agencies. These are all the service providers that are currently working for example, for the fossil fuel industry, and could be doing work for the renewable energy, more work for the renewable energy industry and other climate supporting industries as well. And I think us coming together, take a really hard look about where are we putting our labor and where are we going to work and how could they be moving the needle on climate as well. I think those conversations are starting to happen. Like at the law school, a group of us founded a group called Law Students for Climate Accountability, where we're talking about the role of the legal industry in propping up the fossil fuel industry and supporting their transactions, their litigation, lobbying for the industry. And we came together and published a scorecard ranking law firms on their role in the climate crisis. And I think this is one example of taking, bringing students together to have conversations and even gather data on what is your industry doing in the climate crisis, where do you want to work, and just really taking the time to think, to have meaningful conversations about that with each other and with faculty too, who want to discuss.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting, right? Creating transparency and also just sort of offering different ways for many different industries to put this climate lens over, their screens, everything that is done is sort of filtered through that always. That's really very important. Agree. Sheng Chen, why don't you offer your thoughts on this question? And then we do have one question that came in that I would like to pose to the group, and that'll probably be just about all the time we have. But Sheng Chen, love to hear your thoughts on the role of the student body first in creating a culture of sustainability.
Yeah, so I first want to introduce the student body at our campus and a little more about in our country, because they did a lot in the policymaking area. And I think in the campus, the role is to educate, to act, and to motivate. For the educate, we just hold the 6th Global Model Climate Change Conference of Parties, and it's attracted students all over the world to make more and more people know about climate negotiation and related knowledge. And besides, the most of our students in our university volunteer to go to middle schools and primary schools around the country to teach children there about the sustainable development, about the knowledge about climate change. And as for the actions that really happens in our campus, our students organize events to donate used clothes, books, and so on. And there are students holding classes to teach people how to transform used clothes to bags or artworks by hand. And where on the lack of the innovation in our campus, we hold SDG Hackathon every year. And it really motivates lots of people to come up with their ideas about the sustainable development. And it's really related to their own major, such as computer science. Students, they can use the big data and the software to help students to understand the sustainable development. And I want to add one more little things about the role of our student body in creating cultural sustainability in our country, because Tsinghua University is one of the toppest university in China. So most of our students will go to the Chinese government or help the policymakers to do their own decisions, such as as for myself, as for me, in my summer vacation, I can go to the Minister of the Ecology and Environment to help the governance there to do some research about climate and help them to make some policy, and we really get involved in the policymaking procedure in our country. So I think it's a really good example to tell you.
For sure. Oh yeah, that's fascinating. I have so enjoyed this conversation. This is like so interesting to hear all your perspectives on these important questions. I want to pose this last one, and I'll throw it out to any which one of you that wants to take this question first. But the question is really around how to engage students in advocating for climate change. But more specifically, maybe I'll frame it. As students have so many different priorities when they come onto a campus, and it's always a juggling act on how to use your time the most effectively. So what advice might you give other students at other universities that are seeking ways to engage and drive change on their campuses? Whichever one of you would like to go first, go for it. Okay, I'm gonna have to pick on someone then. Let's see, Arti, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm going to echo what Lisa said about learning how to communicate. It doesn't sound very interesting, but I think that's like the first skill to learn, is how to explain why you find climate change important and parse out why somebody else who might not think that they care about climate change, like why they should care about it. It's like a small way to engage, but I think that's very powerful when talking to other people. With engaging students and finding engaging ways to drive change, climate touches everything and it affects everything. And so there's not a class, or there's almost not a class, that isn't relevant to climate change in some way. And so it can be brought into the classroom in most classrooms in a university. But also that means that perhaps the most interesting way to drive change is not necessarily under the climate umbrella. It's through homelessness or education, transportation, energy, whatever, in the arts, wherever else, climate still has a connection to that. And so sometimes the most interesting or engaging ways are actually not, they don't say climate change like in the title. They
a little
say
less obvious, right? But
Yeah.
There's still a connection there. Great, thank you so much for that perspective. Alyssa, Sheng Chen, either one of you want to go next? Alyssa?
Yeah. So, yeah. Ladies
ahead,
first.
Alyssa.
Yeah,
No, we lots of great thoughts. So adding on to that, I think meeting people where they're at and helping people see how their skills and their experience fit into the picture. And I think, it doesn't just have to be with law or with policy. It could be somebody who loves making graphs and loves data visualization. There's a ton of that in the climate work, and very much echoing what Arti said about, realizing that there's things that aren't labeled climate that are part of the movement and part of taking action. And then I think a second thing is also just building community around it, right? It's building a space where, like Arti was saying, we can process climate grief together, where we can organize together. I'm thinking of, there's a Yale student group that's doing, sign making for an upcoming climate rally. And I think these moments of building community and connection with climate action. And I think, that's been something that's really important to me in any of the climate work I do, is building in time for that kind of just community building. Because then it's also, there's a social aspect as well as the action aspect. And I think just finding ways to bring joy into the work and I think people are drawn to those moments of joy, especially in this pandemic time where it's been really hard to connect with people over over Zoom, and just finding ways to make that possible around climate action is something that's really important to me.
Right, that's great. Yeah, we're all very thirsty for connection, especially these days. Thank you for that. Sheng Chen.
So I think the most important is to find a clear goal, the goal of your career, and to improve your own abilities. And I think those are most crucial, and practice is the only way to improve your own abilities and find what you want to do. So I think it's important to pay more attention to and participate in various events happening in our world. Even in pandemic, we have this virtual meeting and our summit that can bring people together and to share their ideas. So such a large event such as a climate tech summit, and it will bring together the resources and students from universities all over the world. Even we can't meet face to face, but the students from Cambridge, ICL, Oxford, Yale, Tsinghua, and Columbia can participate online, and it will allow us to make like-minded friends and practice our skills, share our ideas, and even find a lifelong career. I think it's a really good thing.
That's great. Well, this has been an incredibly robust conversation. It's been my privilege to be a part of it. Thank you, each of you, for sharing your perspective. Your careers are bright. There's no question about that. So we'll be all looking forward to seeing how you go out there and continue to make an impact, not only at your schools, but on this very important issue beyond graduation, etc. So thank you again, and I'm going to turn it on to Alex to close up the event.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you to everyone who participated in the event today, and to those of us joining virtually in the audience. Hope to see many of you at other Climate Week NYC events this week. Take care.